The departure from the land of wisdom had concluded with a sudden encounter that had led to emotions bursting like the eruption of a volcano. Amongst the docks of Sumeru, a particular ship had been resting like a slumbering beast, and its captain had just returned from the city to set sail. That captain was the robust woman that Ganyu and Keqing knew as Captain Beidou, and upon their eyes meeting their old friend, they had instantly lost their resting emotions. It turned out that Beidou had been out at sea during the events that now haunted Ganyu and Keqing's memories, so she had been clueless on the destruction of Liyue Harbor and Ningguang's demise. Less to say, the cheery captain had immediately lost her resting bottle of rum nestled in her right hand instantly at the mention of the Tianquan's horrid death, having led to anger and disbelief, followed by sadness and acceptance that the two ladies she knew as Ningguang's best weren't feeding her any lies. Upon accepting the truth, she instantly had begun to cry and shout. She had begged for that encounter and information to be false, but she knew it wasn't, and out of respect, Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan had walked off to give Beidou space and time to weep. The three had decided to settle their bellies with a quick meal, knowing that the Crux would be on their way to Inazuma. Beidou may have been delivered tragic news that all three had wished not to have even told her, but all three knew she wouldn't deny them a ride now. They weren't to blame for their grotesque reality. The Tsaritsa and her twisted mind were the culprits. After a good half hour, all three had returned to the docks, where the Alcor remained anchored and rested in the calm water. Beidou hadn't moved an inch, but her demeanor had changed. She was angry, emotionally drained, and lost. But time didn't freeze. It only kept moving forward. She couldn't just sit there forever, and upon their return, Beidou had gotten to her feet very slowly. Whatever you girls need, I'll provide. I can see that our encounter wasn't just a coincidence, but an act of destiny. I know you have a plan, so allow me to help you put these bastards in the ground where they belong. They had not even said a word, and as if she could read the future, Beidou had already caught on to their plan and objective. Therefore, they had stated their plan to go to Inazuma, and had managed to kill two birds with one stone with figuring out where the base that manufactured the androids was in Snezhnaya. Beidou was excellent at navigation as captain of the Alcor, so there was no doubt in their minds that Beidou could decipher the Snezhnayan ship's route that they had examined in the recorded files of Reshav's mind. They'd been at sea for about 8 hours now, and while the crew had retired for the night, Ganyu was wide awake on the bow of the ship. This was her first experience ever traveling by sea, and while it certainly was intimidating at first, after getting over the water's turbulence swaying the Alcor like a baby being cradled by a mother, she adapted to the feeling. The night was calm, the kind of nights Ganyu adored, just allowing the subtle breeze grazing her skin and hair to calm her stressed mind. Tomorrow would be a challenge, and she needed this rare calm before the raging storm in less than 10 hours. Mind if I join you? A voice graced her ears among the ambience of the rolling waves just beyond the wooden support her arms were lazily resting upon. A voice that immediately made her smile. Of course, my love. Ganyu answered happily, turning and meeting the sight of her beloved. A steaming cup of tea rested atop a plate gripped by her left hand. Keqing smiled at the answer, navigating slowly to her beloved's side to avoid spilling her beverage. Upon meeting Ganyu's company, she rested the plate on a flat part of the bow off to the side, joining her love in the serenity of the evening's natural atmosphere. Are you okay? Keqing asked. You haven't really said much since we left the port. I'm fine. I'm just nervous about tomorrow. Ganyu assured.
I've heard rumors that Inazuma isn't the easiest place to get into, and that their archon, the Raiden Shogun, isn't really the type that's open to what we're planning to propose.
Keqing nodded.
The rumors are true. Ever since the declaration of the Vision Hunt Decree, the Land of Eternity has been the equivalent of a peasant trying to get into a king's castle. However, the decree was recently abolished, so maybe this will make our plans go smoother. Besides, we're not going for a long-term stay, just to seek reinforcements, so a ton of papers shouldn't be necessary to just speak with the Raiden Shogun. There's also the matter that what we're proposing concerns the Archon's safety and well-being, so I doubt they'd deny putting input into something that potentially ends them up kidnapped or worse.
Ganyu let out a long breath, smiling at her beloved's words. She couldn't imagine a world without Keqing, despite the past and their differences. Turns out that the saying, opposites attract, was definitely true, because here they were, together with what remained of Liyue Harbor and fighting for retribution.
You're right,
Ganyu confessed.
You always know the right things to say.
Keqing smiled again and nodded her head. A silence followed among them, Keqing taking occasional sips of her tea and joining Ganyu in admiring the sights of the night, up until the sight of a mass of angry thunderclouds came into view. That sight was Inazuma's security barrier, signaling that the calming essence of night was about to turn into a very violent downpour of rain and lightning.
Looks like we've reached the storm barrier of our target destination,
Keqing said.
It's probably best we get inside before we get close.
Ganyu nodded in agreement, having heard stories about sailors' experiences while passing through the storm barrier. To put it lightly, the fellow captains occupying the harbor at the time had stated it as trying to battle the wrath of the gods, and that was terrifying. Ganyu didn't even want to be anywhere close to the upper deck during their passing through the raging storm.
I agree,
Ganyu answered.
We should get to safety before we enter.
With that said, the two gathered up any belongings and quickly moved to the lower bunkers of the Alcor. Beidou had arranged them what she could manage for a bed, but to the three girls it was far from anything as such. The bed was nothing more than a blanket that wasn't even thick enough to comfort their backs from the hardwood floor. The pillows were a stack of spare clothes that were lent to them by the entire fleet, and were surprisingly sturdy enough to pass as an actual pillow. Ganyu, having been born and raised in the mountains of Liyue, had no issue of sleeping on a hard surface, but she couldn't bear watching her beloved sleep on the hard ground, so she'd offered her a spot on her belly. It wasn't much, but it would be more comfy than the clothes. Therefore, Keqing had taken Ganyu's offer and was now resting her head on Ganyu's soft lap. The storm was raging above deck, so the two were wide awake and doing everything they could to ride out the violent turbulence that was attacking the Alcor with an angry force. It hadn't taken long for the storm to attack after they'd retreated to their current position, so they were relieved that they'd gotten out of the crosshairs of the monsoon when they had. Now, it was a matter of Beidou managing to navigate the ship through, having treaded this dangerous route many times before. It felt like the battle with the raging tides and strong gusts had lasted for eternity, but after a long 2 hours, the storm passed, and only then did Ganyu and Keqing finally fall into slumber. On the other hand, Yelan stayed up to converse further with Beidou on the plans that would follow upon docking the Alcor safely in Inazuma's docks. It would be an extensive and difficult process to get an audience with the Raiden Shogun, but Beidou knew of some of the nation's people who had connections to the Archon and her subordinates. It was a matter of getting a message to those subordinates to get into Tenshukaku, and given the nature of the matter, seemed pretty important for the matriarch to give consideration and exception to. It was a process none of them were looking forward to, but it had to be done. And by the time the two robust women had concluded their talk, the sun was already in the sky, and the shores of their destination were in sight. Yelan left the captain to her duties to go wake her two companions in the lower compartments of the ship, finding them shortly and preparing to rouse them from their respective slumbers. However, before she could say anything, something stopped her. "I'm awake. No need to say anything." The voice was Keqing's, her eyes open and head still rested atop Ganyu's abdomen. Her beloved was fast asleep on the blanket mattress, lightly breathing in her slumber as Keqing slowly got to her feet and addressed Yelan. "Let her sleep a little longer. She needs it." Yelan nodded her head in agreement. Then the two ladies quietly moved from the area to the upper deck where all of Beto's crewmates were prepping the ship for its arrival. Beto was standing on the bow with her back turned to both of them, most likely to eye the waters for any unexpected hazards that the crewmate positioned in the crow's nest couldn't see well. Yelan and Keqing navigated to Beto's position, meeting her in less than 20 seconds and taking in the sea's calm and smooth breeze. Beto caught their approach rather quickly, but didn't move, continuing to eye the encroaching mass of land known as Narukami Island. "Good morning, ladies," she greeted. "Morning, Captain Beto," Keqing greeted back. "How's the ship? Did it suffer any damage from the storm?" Beto merely chuckled at the comment. "Nothing more than a few scratches. Other than that, my ship remains unscathed by even the mighty storm that was manifested out of divine power." "Good," Keqing said with a smile. "How long do you think it'll be until we reach Narukami Island?" "I'd estimate our arrival will be in about 20 minutes. From there, Miss Yelan and I will follow up with proper proceedings to get past the guards of Tenshukaku." "Right," she agreed, knowing that Inazuma was easily the most secure of all nations. Note to self, go wake Ganyu in 10 minutes. Upon noting her self-reminder, she looked beyond the bow of the Alcor, immediately seeing their destination inbound. It was quite a sight, given she'd never been to Inazuma, but had always wanted to make time to visit the Land of Eternity. She'd heard many stories and tales about its culture and history, the most invigorating being about when the Raiden Shogun had slain a great serpent and split an island into two separate masses of land. That was enough proof that the Electro Archon was very powerful, and a perfect reason for her to be cautious during their meeting with said matriarch. They were in a whole new land with different standards and laws, and from what she had heard in her occupation as the Yuheng, the Raiden Shogun wasn't afraid to execute anyone who insulted or got in her way. She was a much more strict Archon that wasn't afraid to sever heads from shoulders, and that was intimidating. However, they were not planning to insult the Shogun, but save her from potentially being attacked and kidnapped, so that shouldn't be any reason to be afraid of losing a head or limb. Coming out of her thoughts, Keqing noticed that the Alcor was nearly at the shores of the island, leading her to going below deck to wake her love. It turns out that 10 minutes is much shorter than she had anticipated as she approached the sight of her soulmate, still out like a light. She smiled at the sight, getting to her knees and pecking Ganyu lightly on her left cheek. The action caused Ganyu to rouse from her sleep, muttering cute little moans as she slowly opened her eyes to the sight of Keqing. Upon seeing who had awoken her, she smiled and giggled at the sight of her beloved. Keqing followed with the same actions, leaning down and embracing Ganyu's soft lips with her own as a way of saying good morning. Ganyu repeated the gesture, locking her lips with Keqing's for a long moment, up until they finally broke the seal. "Good morning," Keqing greeted.
"Good morning."
Ganyu returned, sitting up from the hard floor and stretching her limbs.
"Oh, have we arrived?"
"Yeah, but we still have to wait until Yelan and Beidou get the proper requirements for us to enter the borders." Ganyu nodded, her smile not fading.
"How long do you think it will take?"
Ganyu asked, rubbing her eyes. "I'd guess around 3 hours or so. Long enough for us to freshen up as best we can and wake up some more," Keqing replied. Ganyu nodded again.
"All right. I'll be up on deck in about 5 minutes."
Ganyu promised. Keqing smiled and kissed her beloved one more time before leaving her partner to her morning rituals. Upon returning to the upper deck, Keqing was greeted with the sight of the entirety of Beidou's crew in full action. She was very careful not to get in their way as she met back up with Yelan and Beidou on the bow of the Alcor. As she climbed the left set of stairs to the upper part of the ship's front end, she caught a glimpse of the docks of Inazuma, now less than 50 yards away. Upon meeting back up with Yelan, the two didn't speak a word. Today was a big day, and they had to be prepared for whatever the Electro Archon would say or do in their goal of gaining help in a war that was fast approaching. Every nerve in both of their bodies were dancing frantically, knowing that they were now practically stranded and had to be careful about everything they said or did. This wasn't their home anymore. It was the Raiden Shoguns, isolated far from the Teyvat they all knew well. The ship came to a halt, signaling that their mission had officially begun, and the first and most crucial step was now in action. It was time to gain entry to the distant land of eternity, a task that seemed far from possible, but they had to try. Beidou met back up with both of them, meaning that it was time for her and Yelan to move into the borders of Inazuma.
"Ready to go, Miss Yelan?"
Beidou asked with as much confidence as she could muster in the current state of the world.
"As ready as I'll ever be."
Yelan replied in the same exact manner, to which Beidou nodded.
"All right. I'll direct my crew to lower the bridge, then we'll head into Rito to register ourselves to gain entry into Inazuma's borders."
"Sounds like a plan." Yelan finished, to which Beidou turned to head down to the main deck, leaving her and Keqing to discuss anything they may need to say before departing. Yelan confirmed that by turning to meet eye contact with her colleague, Keqing following instantly upon her movement. "I don't know how long we'll be gone, but I still want you to keep watch for any suspicious activity along these docks. I doubt any of the Tsaritsa's army have made it here, but you can never be too careful." Keqing nodded in agreement, Yelan following with a confident smile. "One more thing. If we aren't back by tomorrow, Beidou has already instructed her crew to leave immediately. We cannot risk all of us getting stuck here, so if we don't return, the crew will take you and Ganyu back to Sumeru. From there, I want you two to go to Fontaine to alert the Hydro Archon. Our main priority is to protect any other Archons from danger, so please, don't come looking for me and Captain Beidou if the circumstances end up as such." Keqing didn't argue, knowing Yelan was completely right. This wasn't a game or a matter that couldn't afford mistakes. This was a war that could end Teyvat's entire existence.
"I understand, and promise to follow through."
"Good." Yelan replied. "I want you to relay the same information to Ganyu as well. I know she won't take it as easy as you, given her past, but I want you to do everything you can to make her understand."
"Don't worry.
It's
I will."
okay, Miss Yelan." a familiar soft voice interrupted. The two simultaneously turned to meet the sight of Ganyu, her demeanor calm and undisturbed. Ganyu? How long have you been standing there? Keqing asked. Long enough. And don't worry, I understand and won't do anything to disrupt the plan. While my past may be full of tragedy and loss, that's no reason to destroy everything we've worked so hard for. Shall you and Captain Beidou not return? I will follow through and allow the Alcor's crew to leave Inazuma. Keqing smiled at her beloved's maturity, happy that she was just as aware as she was that they couldn't risk anything in their current situation. Well, in that case, that saves me a lot of worry, Yelan stated, folding her arms. We can't reverse time, so mourning over the past will get us nowhere, Ganyu stated. I've learned that, and I've also realized that there are bigger issues in our current predicament that won't get solved by crying or wishing that it's all just a nightmare. If we're going to win this war, I need to be strong. Keqing and Yelan were shocked. This was a whole different Ganyu than before, and it was clear that she wasn't to be underestimated. You're right, Ganyu, Keqing said. We all need to be strong right now, and I'm sorry if we offended you in any way. Ganyu shook her head and smiled in assurance as she made her way fully up to the bow, taking her position next to her love. Yelan admired the sight of her two colleagues, standing in a stoic stance against the world. They looked so fearless and unfazed by the looming peril beyond the horizon, but even she knew that they were far from it. They were scared just as much as she was, but they had to mask the fear to remain strong for each other. You two are perfect together, Yelan complimented. Love is the strongest form of strength, and it's clear you two have a very strong bond, even in a world on the edge of an apocalypse. The two blushed at the compliment, Keqing motioning Ganyu to hold her hand out of Yelan's sights. Ganyu returns the gesture, gripping and embracing her beloved's warm hand in comfort and strength. No matter what, always keep that bond you two share strong. Yelan continued. It just might be the very thing that can lead us to victory in the final battle, even if the odds are stacked against us. The two lovers were not sure what she meant, but accepted the words regardless. Following her statement, the sight of Beidou came into view, meaning it was time for Yelan to depart. Looks like it's time for me to take my leave, Yelan stated, starting her way towards the stairs, but stopped to say one more thing. Remember, if we're not back by tomorrow, go back to Sumeru and head for Fontaine. Understood, Keqing answered for both of them, following with a nod from Yelan. Having stated her last reminder, Yelan continued her departure down the stairs, then disappeared from sight amongst the sea of Beidou's crew, currently swarming the main deck. The plan was officially in motion, and as a way of calming their nerves, the two gripped each other's hands tight in assurance that they both were ready for whatever was to come in their time along the shorelines of Inazuma's borders. It was sunset when the sight of Beidou and Yelan returned to the main deck of the Alcor. Upon seeing the two robust women's return, Ganyu sighed a heavy breath of relief, currently assisting some of the Crux's staff with some rather simple tasks that were casual everyday ordeals aboard the ship. Keqing wasn't far behind, enjoying a nice cup of tea on the stern with some other members of the Crux fleet. To kill time, she'd assisted her current crowd of women with some of their own share of chores, having been excellent at resolving them due to her experience as the Yuheng. Less to say, by the time she was done, it had been noon, to which she had decided to take a break for some lunch with her beloved. They'd taken their lunch break to below deck to have some privacy, and while it wasn't the best meal for either of them, they managed. After their food was consumed, the two decided to catch up on some sleep, up until Keqing remembered Yelan's request of watching for any suspicious activity along the docks. Therefore, Ganyu was left to get some much-needed rest, and up until only an hour prior, had slept like a baby. It was just past dusk now, and while Keqing was tired, her previous occupation made her tiredness null and void. It wasn't her first time working with her mental state nagging her for rest. Yelan met up with Keqing first, Ganyu not far behind, ready to deliver the outcome of her and Beto's long day in the borders of Rito. Once Ganyu had caught up, she didn't waste time and started to speak. Sorry for the long wait, girls, but getting through these borders is the equivalent of trying to turn silver into gold. She explained in a tone that spoke of tiredness and slight annoyance. No worries, Miss Yelan, Keqing assured. I'm happy to report that there's been no account of suspicious activity along the docks. It's been mostly quiet and dead for the most part. That's good to hear, and I'm also happy to report that we are now legal to enter Inazuma City and beyond. Yelan reported. However, in the case of Tenchukaku and gaining an audience with the Electro Archon, that's on hold for a minute. To get into the Raiden Shogun's abode, we had to fill out a submission form with the information regarding why we wish to seek an opportunity to speak with her. And how long will that take to reach Tenchukaku? Keqing questioned. In terms of a regular request, it would likely take weeks to months. But in the case of an emergency, the official we spoke with said it won't take any longer than 3 days. Yelan answered. Keqing sighed heavily at the answer, given the clock to doomsday was ticking, but she couldn't argue with the legal system of Inazuma. Having been part of the system that confirmed or denied a meeting with the Tianquan, she knew very well how these customs worked. I should have seen that coming, Keqing said. 3 days was pretty much the same estimate for a meeting with Ningguang, and in the case of an urgent matter, there is a chance that it can be pushed forward faster, but it's about a 20% chance. I can confirm that as well, Ganyu added. The forms to meet with Ningguang reached my desk in no less than 24 hours, but the conditions for the meeting request to be forwarded straight to the Jade Chamber had to fall in line with certain circumstances. Those were that the request had to be from a Leeway official, the request had to do with something related to business deals, or that the request fell under something that concerned the citizens of Leeway Harbor themselves. So, where does a request along the lines of endangerment of an Archon and her entire nation fall under? Yelan questioned. That would meet the criteria of an emergency situation, which would be enough to forward the request, most likely to the recipient themselves, Ganyu confirmed. However, that was Leeway Harbor standards. I have no clue if the same regulations apply to Inazuma's government. So, we could be seeing the Shogun by tomorrow, or next week at most. Yelan nodded in agreement. Very well. Then, I think it's best we get accustomed to Inazuma. Beto has arranged a meeting with some connections she has here. Connections that might make our reason for coming here go faster. So, I think it's best we get our things off the Alcor and head for Komori Tea House in Inazuma City. Sounds like a plan. Keqing agreed. However, where will we be taking residency for the time being? That'll be arranged upon your meeting, Beidou confirmed. Trust me when I say that these people are very welcoming and won't turn you down. Keqing nodded, having no reason not to trust one of her once boss's most trusted friends. Alright, then let's get our things, then we'll head for Inazuma City. With no other word, the three moved to below deck and worked fast on collecting their belongings. It was approaching night, and the last thing they wanted to be doing was fighting hilichurls in the dark. Among all of them, Beidou was the only person who knew anything about Inazuma. Aside from that, none of them knew anything about the Electro Capital, specifically its dangers under the curtain of nighttime. It took them less than 5 minutes to collect everything, finding their way back to the main deck and meeting with Beidou one more time for some last thoughts. Watch yourself, Captain, Yelan stated. We promise to be back within a few days at most. Don't rush yourselves, Beidou replied. Do whatever you need to make sure those bastards that destroyed Liyue Harbor pay for what they did. You can be damn sure of that, Yelan assured. Let's just hope the Raiden Shogun hears us out, and we can finally gain a step ahead of the Tsaritsa. Best of luck to all of you, Beidou finished. Then, with an assuring nod from all three of them, Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan made their way off the Alcor and onto the docks of Inazuma. Yelan knew the way to Inazuma City thanks to Beidou, and with quick steps and hope in their hearts, what remained of Liyue Harbor's existence treaded deep into the mass known as Narukami Island. After asking some locals and assuring the main sharp-tongued guard of Komori Tea House that they had a reason to enter the establishment, Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan found themselves a room and now sit and wait for whoever Beidou had assigned them to meet with. The establishment carried a heavy scent of a variety of teas and incense that was being burned in each room. A familiar essence to Keqing and Ganyu, seeing Ningguang always had it burning in her office. It carried a sense of familiarity, as if the incense currently permeating the entire building were one of the several ones that the Tianquan had fancied. It brought back memories, painful ones. But while it hurt to recollect memories of meeting up with their once boss and friend, they also relished in the imagery currently flashing before their eyes. Those were times they couldn't get back, and reliving times of just chatting with Ningguang over business affairs and such brought a sense of peace for just a moment. A sense that they all so desperately desired to feel again. Out of their peaceful thoughts, they were interrupted by the sight of a woman who radiated elegance and kindness that couldn't be matched by anyone. Her demeanor was one of innocence and royalty, which immediately made all of them rise to attention at the lady's approach and presence. However, upon her response, all of their prior assumptions went out the window. Oh, there's no need for such pleasantries. Please, sit. So they did, and not long after, their newest guest had joined them at the table. I'm assuming you're the person that Captain Beidou assigned us with? Keqing questioned carefully. Indeed. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kamisato Ayaka. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance. The pleasure is ours, Miss Ayaka. Yelan replied. My name is Yelan. I'm a former agent of the Ministry of Civil Affairs. These two are Ganyu and Keqing. the former Yuheng and head secretary of the Tianquan of Liyue Harbor. A pleasure to meet all of you. However, Lady Ganyu and Keqing's names are nothing unfamiliar to me, seeing I've heard of you from someone who you might know well. Does the name Ether and Paimon mean anything to all of you? Both Ganyu and Keqing nodded, having never forgotten about the person who literally saved Liyue Harbor twice. Who could forget the savior of our home? Keqing stated. Believe it or not, our first meeting was quite bizarre. He was trying to get to the Jade Chamber using the Guizhong Ballista. Apparently, someone forgot to fill him in with the proper way to actually get there. Ganyu jumped at the words, remembering her complete failure of informing Ether of the way to get to the Jade Chamber. Hey! You don't need to bring that up. Ganyu's face adorned a blush, along with a visible gleam of a patch of sweat starting to seep from her forehead. Keqing giggled at her beloved's sheepish nature, still remembering their confrontation regarding said issue. Less to say, Ganyu looked exactly as she did currently. It's alright, Miss Ganyu, Ayaka added. Sometimes things just slip the mind unexpectedly. I should know. I've had my fair share of accidental mistakes. Ganyu still wore her blush, but she kindly accepted the attempt to ease her mistake with a smile. Right. Now that we're all properly acquainted with one another, I suppose I'll allow you to fill me in on the reason for this meeting, Ayaka stated. Very well. Well, to put it in a simple way, a few weeks ago, Liyue Harbor was removed from existence by a creation of the Tsaritsa. We're all that remain of the disaster, and over the past few weeks, have obtained information that proves that the Tsaritsa is planning to go to war with all of Teyvat, using the power of the archons to fuel androids with ungodly abilities. Ganyu and Keqing witnessed these abilities themselves the very night it all happened. Ayaka's face had turned pale. This had not been what she was expecting upon this meetup, and the information she had just been fed was enough to make her quiver. I see, Ayaka said slowly. I have no suspicions that this is false information. That I can assure you. If you could, Monsieur Lan, explain fully what your intent is for coming to Inazuma. Gladly. Simply put, we're here for two reasons. To warn the Raiden Shogun of the potential danger she could be in, and to hopefully seek help in this war. I see. So, you are hoping to gain assistance from Inazuma's government and an army to fight against the Tsaritsa and save Teyvat? Correct, Miss Ayaka. We also hope to gain hospitality with your assistance. I understand. Unfortunately, I have no control over the government of Inazuma, so I can't really help there. The only person with control over anything in the Inazuma government system is the Shogun herself. Yelan nodded, having expected this outcome. We've already done the proper proceedings to gain an audience with her, but what we don't know is how long it'll take to get her attention on the matter. Ayaka put a hand to her chin and thought. The issue was both desperate and critical, so she was doing everything she could to hopefully give her new acquaintances help in any way she could. It took a minute, but eventually, she spoke again. All right. I think I see everything clearly now, and I believe I can help you to get an audience with the Shogun beyond proceedings customs. The situation concerns not just our Archon, but the entirety of Inazuma and Teyvat. This is an exception to the usual protocol, so here's what I'm going to do. First, I will kindly provide you with hospitality within the Kamisato estate. You have brought to light a major issue that you didn't even need to consider Inazuma or anybody with, but you did.
and that's enough to provide you all a roof and anything else you may need. Second, I will take this information to Tenchukaku myself. I cannot guarantee that the Shogun will accept your request, but given the details involve her and her entire nation being at risk of annihilation, I believe she will accept. I will also inform her that you are trusted friends of Ether, given that she and him developed a great amount of trust over their time here. That might be a guaranteed ticket for a seating with our god. Third and last, shall the Shogun accept your request, I will contact the Shogunate to escort you to meet with General Sangonomiya Kokomi of Watatsumi Island. Her forces will help our own in this war, shall the Shogun choose to engage. Sighs of relief escaped all three of them, following with smiles. This truly felt like the biggest victory they'd had in a long time. Thank you so much for your help, Ms. Kamisato, Yelan said calmly. We will never forget this, despite whatever happens. You're very welcome, Miss Yelan. While a war is the last thing Inazuma or any of Teyvat wants, it's clear that the Tsaritsa has already decided to attack. Inazuma can't become what happened to your home, and the only way to prevent it is to stop the one who will eventually meet our borders. Yelan nodded, impressed by just how well Ayaka had narrowed down the potentiality of the entire situation. You are very wise, Miss Ayaka. I can tell this isn't your first time dealing with a desperate situation. I truly admire your way of analyzing things. A blush adorned Ayaka's face at the compliment. Oh, well, I appreciate the sentiment, Miss Yelan. Now, I suppose I should accompany you back to the estate. From there, as promised, I will go to Tenchukaku and speak with the Shogun. My housekeeper Toma will get you all acquainted upon my departure. Sounds good. Yelan concluded, turning her gaze to Ganyu and Keqing across the table. Let's go, ladies. We've got a long day ahead tomorrow. Ganyu and Keqing nodded in agreement, following with all four of them getting up from their seats. From there, they followed Ayaka out of Komori Tea House, all the way back to the Kamisato estate, just out beyond Chinju Forest. Upon entering Ayaka's home, it became clear to Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan that their assumption of their new ally and friend being one of royalty and wealth became very evident. The entirety of the inside of the abode was decorated with traditional items related to Inazuma's culture, but the most apparent one that caught their attention was folded-out fans. The fans were clearly crafted out of fine material and revealed a picture of several different things. It was quite a sight, and further proved their assumptions, seeing wealthy individuals, mainly females, carried folding fans to cool themselves down. Ayaka had caught sight of her guests admiring her massive collection of traditional knickknacks, and quickly explained why she had so many. I see you've taken quite a curiosity to the decor. She started. Well, these actually aren't all mine, but were my mother's. She loved to collect them, because she admired the art that the fans revealed when unfolded. They are absolutely beautiful. Ganyu complimented. Your mother had great taste. Ayaka smiled at the comment. I appreciate that dearly, Miss Ganyu. They are all I have left of her. So, to know somebody recognizes the same beauty as my mother did is a beauty of its own nature. You and my mother would have gotten along very well. I'm delighted to hear that, and I'm very sorry for your loss. I know how it feels to lose someone you love unconditionally. It's all right. While it was hard at first, I've grown a lot since that fateful day. My brother and I were left with such a heavy weight to carry, but over time, managed to carry on. That's how it's been ever since we lost our home.
Keqing added,
These past weeks have felt like we've been climbing a mountain with no end, but we've kept strong to eventually find the top, no matter what it takes. And you will find it.
Ayaka replied.
You three have come so far, and I can tell that you are tired, worn, and emotionally drained by your losses. However, beyond that, you carry a strength the equivalent of the might of the Raiden Shogun's Muso no Hitotachi, a blade that many have tried to face, but only few have succeeded. Keep that strength strong, and we will all win this war.
Ganyu and Keqing nodded in agreement, allowing Ayaka to proceed with whatever she planned to do next.
All right, follow me, and I'll introduce you to Toma.
Ayaka directed, to which he started forward, and the three followed suit. She led them towards the back of the estate, where a tall man was attending to some matter that was likely everyday work for him. He was dressed in mostly red clothing and carried a heavy hue of loyalty and kindness, and upon Ayaka making her presence, he jumped to attention.
Welcome back, Miss Kamisato,
he said loyally, turning his gaze to her unannounced guests.
I see we have company.
May I ask who they are?
Calm yourself, Toma,
Ayaka answered.
These three are our guests, and have come to Inazuma on a desperate matter that involves the Shogun and all of Teyvat.
Toma's demeanor shifted almost instantly upon the mention of the severity of the situation. It was something he definitely wasn't expecting to hear.
Wow, I definitely wasn't expecting something like that. Could you fill me in? Of course, but I'm afraid they'll have to do that because I have to make a quick trip to Tenshukaku regarding said matter. Please give these three a good meal and beds to sleep in, seeing they might be here for a while.
Very well.
However, somebody should accompany you. It's a long way to Tenshukaku, and there's lots of potential dangers that could pose a threat to you along the road. I'm a big girl, Toma. I assure you I can handle anything that may cross my path. I'll be fine.
Toma expressed a look that made it clear that he didn't agree, but he couldn't argue with her. Therefore, he just nodded his head reluctantly and allowed her to proceed. Ayaka bowed as a way of saying goodbye, saying one last thing before turning to leave.
I'll be back before morning. Feel free to make yourself at home while Toma gets you properly acquainted.
Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan nodded in agreement. Then, with no time wasted, Ayaka turned away. Following her departure, Toma proceeded to the kitchen to prepare the three an Inazuma-style dish, while the girls took to conversing for the time being. It was up to Ayaka now to persuade the God of Eternity to hear them out, a factor that made them anxious for the remainder of their night in the Kamisato estate. Ayaka had returned a few hours after every light within the Kamisato estate had simmered to nothing, but had decided not to rouse her new friends from their deep slumbers. Instead, she had retired to her quarters, shed herself of her clothing to change into her usual nightgown, and drifted into her own slumber upon her head meeting her pillow. Upon opening her eyes to the rays of light peeking through her window the next morning, she raised herself to her feet, got dressed, and moved out to the dining area of her practical mansion. She was met with the sight of her new comrades and Toma feasting on some traditional Inazuma-style breakfast dishes. Ganyu was slowly nibbling away at a rice dish, Keqing was treating herself to some miso soup, and Yelan was sitting in a position that radiated an unbound amount of patience. It was likely that she had already finished her meal. The sound of Ayaka's footwear echoing with each step she took caught the three's attention, greeting her with a respectful good morning upon her presence being made. Good morning to you as well, Ayaka replied nicely, bowing gracefully as a traditional gesture. I trust that you all slept well? The best you can in a world on the brink of chaos, Yelan stated. At least that was my case. As for these two, I could hear someone talking in their sleeps through the wall. Ganyu and Keqing blushed instantly, their expressions turning to looks of embarrassment. What did you hear? Keqing asked in a shaky voice. I'm afraid that's my little secret to keep, hon. Yelan finished with a wink and smug smile. The blush adorning the two lovers' faces did not disappear, knowing Yelan wasn't kidding. It wasn't until Ayaka spoke that the two buried that information in the deepest corner of their minds and moved on to listening to what their new friend had to say. I'm glad you all at least got some rest. Now, onto the information I'm sure you are all anxious to hear. She walked to the table and took a seat, continuing with her announcement of the newfound information she had obtained less than 10 hours prior. I couldn't get into Tenshukaku, seeing her second-in-command, Kujo Sara, didn't believe me about the matter. However, don't get too down about it just yet, because while Kujo Sara is a very strict lady, once I said that you were trusted friends of Aether, she opened a door for compromise. And what are the conditions to prove our situation true? Yelan questioned. What anyone would want. Proof that it is actually true. Therefore, unless you have proof of anything related to the situation, I'm afraid that your request will be looked at as nothing but a case of a joke. Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan were not surprised by this outcome. They'd react the same if some random person had come to them wanting to see Ningguang over a matter that seemed like the plot of a war novel. They would have proposed the same condition, so this wasn't anything unexpected. No surprise. This Kujo Sara lady did the right thing, and luckily, we actually do have proof of an android existing. However, Inazuma lacks the proper technology to see it through, seeing it requires a computer. Technology that only Sumeru and Fontaine have access to. I see. If you don't mind, could you show me exactly what this proof is? Sure. Yelan answered simply, reaching into one of her pockets and pulling out the microchip that she and the professor had extracted from Reshov's decapitated head. Yelan slid the chip across the table, following with Ayaka grabbing and beginning to examine it. I've heard of these existing, but given that the Shogun had kept Inazuma in a state of limbo for centuries, we never developed the technology to examine these kinds of things. While I have no reason to not believe you about this, I'm afraid that unless we can actually show Sara the contents on this, she won't accept it as evidence. Then it looks like we have no choice but to send Miss Sara to the academia or to bring Professor Oswald here. It's not easy to persuade the second-in-command of an archon to leave her post for at least 2 days. Therefore, it's likely going to have to be the latter option. Yelan nodded. Then so be it. What's the fastest way to get a message from here to Sumeru, Miss Ayaka? Simple. You'd have to write a letter, take it to the postal service station in Rito, and wait for a response. And how long would that take? I'm not sure. It's a matter of when the ship that delivers comes back and where it needs to travel to on its voyage. It could take days, weeks, or even months. Yelan didn't like that answer. They didn't have time to wait for weeks or months for Oswald to get their letter and travel there. The Tsaritsa was already in action, and the more time they wasted, the more the archons were at risk of danger. she was at a loss. That's not going to work. Every second that goes by gives the Tsaritsa more time to develop her army. This Kujo Sara is putting her Archon in more danger than she is protecting her with this compromise. I understand, and I tried to make her see that, but she wouldn't listen. I'm sorry I couldn't get you a better option. Miss Ayaka, there's no need for you to apologize. Ganyu sympathized. You did everything you possibly could, and we appreciate all of your efforts. Exactly, Keqing added. In the end, the Sara's compromise just isn't acceptable, so there's only one option. We need to come up with a new plan. Yelan nodded in agreement, speaking up. I completely agree. So for now, we forget trying to compromise with the Shogun's second-in-command and move on to coming up with another plan. Yelan turned her gaze to Ayaka. Miss Ayaka, is there anybody else you can think of that could get us through to the Shogun without wasting too much time? Ayaka put a hand to her chin and thought, trying to think of anybody in Inazuma that had a direct connection to the Electro Archon. Immediately, she came up with a solution, remembering one specific person that was just as close to the Shogun as Kujo Sara. Yes, there is one other person who may be able to get you through Tenchukaku's doors, and she may believe you. And who is that? The head of the Grand Narukami Shrine, Guji Yai. The hike to the Grand Narukami Shrine had been a task that made hiking the peaks of Liyue's vast mountains feel like child's play in comparison. Had Ayaka not been with them, there was absolutely no shot that they would have found the way to the top of the mountain that housed the shrine. It was clear that the trail was designed to keep any people with malicious intent out, seeming less like a trail and more like an obstacle course. Upon meeting the Grand Narukami Shrine, they were greeted with the sight of one of the shrine maidens that acted as additional security for the sacred monument. Having been accompanied by Ayaka, the maiden let them pass, the Kamisados being a trusted name in the shrine's history. The shrine maiden had also caught onto the reasoning of their arrival, having walked off to fetch the main head of the monument, Guji Yai, aka Yai Miko. If any of the Kamisado siblings showed up at the top step of the shrine's entrance, it usually meant that it was due to some kind of ordeal that only Yai could deal with. There was no telling how said lady would react to this visit, but given Kujo Sara had given them an impossible proposition, they had had no choice but to resort to this. Within a time of less than 5 minutes, a woman with long pink hair, dressed in an attire similar to her fellow maidens, appeared from behind the main building out from in front of the 4 girls. She also had 2 curved flaps on both sides of her head that Ganyu specifically noticed. They were similar to a young alchemist that she had met in her time in Mondstadt, having 2 similar curved flaps that she later found out were ears. That made her wonder if the 2 extending from Yai's hair were also ears, but she didn't want to be disrespectful, so she just kept her mouth shut. To say Lady Yai looked majestic and very wise was an understatement. It was clear that, just like Ganyu, she was someone of an ancient age and carried an unbound amount of ancient knowledge. It fit perfectly, given her occupation as the head maiden of the shrine, but the question was still in the air of whether or not she'd actually help them in their current predicament. Miss Kamisato and friends, to what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? Yai greeted. Her voice was somewhat lazy and sarcastic, as if she were lying about having any pleasure in them pulling her away from her work to hear them out. Greetings, Lady Yai. Ayaka followed. I apologize for the unexpected visit, but something that concerns the whole of Inazuma and Teyvat has come up, and we are hoping you can help these three. Her piercing violet eyes averted to Yelan, Ganyu, and Keqing. It was intimidating, but they all held their ground strong. Oh, and what is it that these poor dears need from me? She said sarcastically. I am but a mere maiden of the shrine. I have nothing like the strength or will of a god. Ayaka turned her gaze to Yelan as a hint to start explaining, to which she caught and followed through by explaining everything that had occurred over the past weeks and why they had come to her for help. At the end of the explanation, Yai's intimidating demeanor had shifted to something more serious. That proved one thing, and that was a good sign. They had managed to convince her that this wasn't misinformation in any sort of manner. So, that ice witch has finally decided to actually do something after all this time. Yai responded, following with a sigh. Look, I usually wouldn't even care about affairs that don't even concern myself or Inazuma. But given, just by looking at your demeanors, and the fact that Miss Kamisato believes you, I don't even need to sleep on the matter of whether or not you're telling the truth. I've been around long enough to know when someone is speaking truthfully about something of this caliber, and I can tell you've spoken only the truth. Therefore, I will hear you out on this, and will escort you into Tenshukaku myself. If this didn't involve A and all of Inazuma, I would have sent you all packing. However, this is no longer a matter of if A and all of Inazuma will be involved. It's a matter of we will eventually be involved. Therefore, I will help you to convince A that this is no small matter. I rarely visit Tenshukaku, so my unexpected presence will likely be enough to drive A out of her plane of euthymia. From there, I will do all I can to help you, seeing you actually care to protect all of the archons. That is enough for all of you to earn my trust and respect. Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan were shocked at how easily they had convinced Yai, but it was clear that she cared for the Electro Archon and Inazuma as if it were her own family. They wasted no time to agree by thanking the maiden, feeling as if a ton of weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Thank you for hearing us out, Lady Yai, Keqing stated. Yai didn't say anything, just nodded with a serious expression on her face, following with a simple statement. Follow me, and I'll take you to Tenshukaku. The four ladies agreed, starting to follow Yai to the steps of Tenshukaku to achieve what they had set out to do. Upon meeting the first set of steps to Tenshukaku's doors, a familiar face to Ayaka met them in the form of a barricade. Kujo-Sara stood valiant and loyal in place, not budging to grant them entry. Unless you show me proof of this supposed war on the horizon, nobody is getting past, Sara directed in a stern voice. Nobody said anything, Yai taking the lead by walking up to Sara and giving her a glare that showed that what she was about to say was not anything sarcastic or of a joking manner as usual. They've provided enough to me, and you know full well that I have no malicious intentions towards A, she directed, sharply and clearly. I know you don't, but they are trusted colleagues of mine, Yai intervened. Now,
unless you want my friend and your shogun to end up potentially kidnapped or worse, you will step aside and let these ladies proceed to Tenshukaku with no further interruptions. Sara was pinned, and she knew she couldn't argue with a kitsune that had thousands of years worth of knowledge and experience. Therefore, she surrendered and stepped aside, allowing Yae and the others entry to the pathway that led to the Raiden Shogun's abode. Yae passed first, following Keqing, Ganyu, and lastly, Yelan. However, just as Yelan was about to pass through, she was stopped by Sara. If anything happens to the Shogun, your heads will be removed from your shoulders. That's a promise. Yelan didn't say anything regarding the clear threat, and rushed to catch up with her comrades. They were at Tenshukaku's entrance in little time, stopping shortly to compose themselves for the confrontation just beyond the two doors before them. I'll do the talking first. Don't say anything until I direct one of you to speak. Is that clear? Crystal. Yelan answered. Got it. Keqing followed. Understood. Ganyu finished. With assurance that her fellow comrades understood her previous statement clearly, Yae wasted no time and pushed open the massive double doors, leading the others through into a long, wide, and quiet room. Upon the double doors closing and clearing the entrance, all of their gazes met the one lone occupant present in the room. She was seated on a stage with the symbol of her nation, a Mitsudome, as her background. This was in no doubt the royal court of Inazuma's Raiden Shogun, and upon said archon meeting their gaze, it became even more apparent. There were no guests scheduled to meet with me this hour. The Shogun spoke somewhat robotic, as if she were emotionless. Who has come to seek an audience with me unannounced? Yae followed through with the plan, speaking first. Cut the theatrics, she demanded, as if she had a higher power over the Shogun. I've come to speak with A, not you. It is imperative that she comes out to speak on this matter. The Shogun didn't shift in any way, as if she hadn't even heard Yae's words. But upon the archon's next statement, that assumption had been proven false. I cannot guarantee that your request can be accepted, but I will oblige to your request, Yae. However, before I take any further actions, I must request that you tell me who you have brought here, minus Miss Kamisato. These three are Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan. They have come regarding a matter that concerns you, A, and all of Inazuma itself. Again, the Shogun didn't even budge the slightest from the statement, but she answered with a simple nod. I can see why this matter requires what you have requested, Yae. I will follow your request and allow you to speak with Raiden A. It went silent for a minute, but upon the archon's demeanor changing entirely, Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan were beyond confused. It was as if the Shogun had two different people living in one body. Miko. The Shogun spoke in a whole different tone of voice, rising to her feet from her sitting position. What's going on? Why have you brought three strangers to Tenshukaku? Forgive the abrupt interruption, but you and Inazuma are in danger. Danger? Yae, what is going on? I'll let these three explain, seeing they were the messengers of this news. Yae stated, giving Yelan the permission to start talking. To put it simply, Your Highness, our home, Liyue Harbor, was attacked and sunk into the ocean by a group of androids that were created by the Tsaritsa herself. Over the past few weeks, these two and myself have traveled across Teyvat and have discovered evidence that proves that the Tsaritsa is planning to kidnap the archons for malicious purposes. On top of that, she's also planning to end all of the major nations of Teyvat using the power of the archons,
including you, and recreate a whole new world. A was shaken, but not convinced, looking down at Yelan with somewhat belief. This sounds heavily far-fetched, but given you convinced Yai, I do have some incentive to believe you. However, I must question one thing. How do you know that a fellow archon of this world plans to kidnap and use the power of gods for destruction? Because this wouldn't be happening if Rex Lapis, aka Morax, had been present in Liyue Harbor the night it all happened. Ganyu and Keqing checked his usual haunts, but he was nowhere to be found. On top of that, the Adepti, fellow guardians of Liyue, were also absent, and they were the same case as Morax. The Adepti and Morax are all missing, and given what Ganyu witnessed when Ningguang, aka the Tianquan, was killed, it's clear they already have access to godly power. A took a moment to ponder on the answer Yelan had given her, finding the whole thing as unbelievable as one of Yai's romance novels that she had once read. To be safe, she responded with something that would give her full clarity on her decision. All right, but let me ask you a simple question to determine my decision. What is the reason you have come to Tenshukaku to seek an audience with me? To warn you of the danger and seek Inazuma's assistance in this war. The Tsaritsa has already acted, so there's no room for if Inazuma will be a target, because you already are a target. A paused, taking in all of the information. All of this sounded like impossible nonsense to her, but a part of her wanted to believe it was actually true. However, she couldn't believe something like this without some kind of proof. She sighed. While you all seem like good people, and even Yai heard you out, I'm sorry, but I cannot believe something so unbelievable without proof. Therefore, unless you can give me proof that any of what you have said has happened, I will not take any initiative to accept your request any further. Her decision was made, and they were back at square one. Even with her closest friend supporting their request, the Electro Archon had still denied them any chance. All three of them felt like they had just been punched in the stomach by a giant Minotaur. Any feeling of victory sinking like a stone in water. A, as your familiar, I must ask that you reconsider your decision. You know that I've been around for thousands of years, so my judgment is correct most of the time. If you don't trust them, then let me ask this. Do you trust me? That was a solid counter, and gave the three hope for just a second. Yai, you know I trust you with my life, but this matter requires so much that could cost lives or make us vulnerable to any malicious actions these three may have if they are lying. I cannot take such actions until I know we are actually at war with the Tsaritsa. Now, unless you three can provide any evidence of your supposed situation, I ask that you kindly escort yourselves out of Tenshukaku. All hope was lost. There was nothing they could do. There was no chance that she'd leave her nation to see the remains of Liyue Harbor in ruins, nor would the chip be enough to convince her. For the first time in this entire endeavor, nobody had a plan B. Therefore, they gave up and started towards the door. However, just as they were about to creak the door open, Ganyu suddenly spoke up, surprising everyone, even her beloved. Wait! I think I have a way of proving to her that we're not lying. The sudden exclamation of a hopeful solution made everyone jump, even Yai. However, they were open to any potential solution to A's rejection, so they just continued to listen. While I don't usually speak of my true identity, I am half Qilin, Your Highness. Ganyu explained, walking back towards the center of the room.
Jalen possessed special abilities that are connected to the soul of one's being, and given the events of the past 3 weeks traumatized me and are burrowed deep in my soul, I believe I can show you exactly what I experienced the night it all started.
A didn't seem to flinch, but just by looking at her posture, she was clearly intrigued. After a long moment of pondering the matter, she came to a decision.
Very well. I will accept this request.
Just to know that I'm only agreeing to this over the fact that I know you aren't lying. Miko possesses a very similar ability, and I've seen for myself that it can be done. However, in return, you must agree to leave if this doesn't work. Are we clear?
Yes, I will honor your conditions, Your Highness.
A nodded as a closure to their agreement, stepping down from her throne and meeting Ganyu's position. At first, the two didn't say anything, only stared in suspense over what was about to occur. However, the tension was broken upon Ganyu reaching out her right hand to A, preparing to channel all of her traumatic memories to the matriarch's own soul.
Take my hand,
Ganyu directed, to which the shogun nodded and held out her left hand. Following that action, Ganyu let out a shallow breath and closed her eyes, gripping A's hands gently and leading all of her memories into the matriarch's mind and soul. Upon the flow of negative energy meeting her body, A immediately began to see the cluster of visceral and traumatic memories that Ganyu had collected ever since the night she had awoken to the knocks of Baiwen. Almost immediately, A's demeanor began to shift at the imagery playing out before her eyes. The ungodly amount of fire engulfing every inch of Liyue Harbor. Hundreds of charred corpses of men, women, and children. Keqing's horrid state when Ganyu had found her amongst the chaos. Ningguang's demise. It all emotionally impacted her, reminding her of when she had found Makoto's limp body during the destruction of Konria. It was almost exact to what she was witnessing, and with that, she knew immediately that these strangers that had come to warn her of this lingering danger were telling the absolute truth.
That's enough!
A exclaimed emotionally, unaware that she had started to cry amongst the horror of Ganyu's memories. Ganyu released her grip and channeled all of the memories back to her own soul, catching the sight of the Raiden Shogun in absolute despair.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. Your memories just reminded me of something tragic. A took a moment to compose herself before speaking any further, doing her best to rid herself of the maleficent thoughts currently plaguing her entire being. It took a long minute to finally regain her composure, meeting Ganyu's gaze and speaking at long last.
I need you all to tell me everything.
A answered, declaring her verdict on the matter.
I now know for sure that all of Teyvat is in grave danger, and that this isn't just a matter that can be solved with the power of a lone archon like myself.
Keqing and Yelan sighed in relief that Ganyu's last-ditch effort had convinced the Shogun, and from there, they proceeded to explain every single detail about the past weeks. It took a long while to explain everything, but it was clear that A was now on their side, so it was imperative to tell her everything they knew. They spoke of their alliance with Mondstadt, capturing Reshov and learning of his true identity, the contents of the microchip, and the fact that there were hundreds or thousands of androids being made and infused with Morax and the Adepti's energy as they spoke. At the end of it all, A looked pale in the face, and for the first time in centuries, she was actually scared to death.
I can't believe this. I knew the Tsaritsa was different from myself and my other fellow archons, but to believe she'd actually use us as tools to fuel machines designed to end the world, it's just absurd.
It is, but the matter of the fact is that it is happening, eh? You, me, Inazuma, and the rest of the world are all not safe in any way as we speak, and we can't simply hide away anymore. Unless we stop that twisted witch from completing her army before it's too late, there may be no world to fight for anymore. I understand that, and I know what needs to be done. First, we cannot leave our borders open anymore. These threats look like everyday regular people, so as of now, all of Inazuma must be protected, something that only I am capable of doing. Therefore, I must travel straight to the center of all of Inazuma and use my power to amass a barrier that will stop any outsiders from entering or leaving. It may take a massive amount of my strength, but I must protect my people. I refuse to allow the Tsaritsa to use me as a battery for the end of the world. Don't forget that you have a familiar with thousands of years of knowledge and experience. Inazuma is mine and all of my fellow Kitsune's homes too, so I will gather all of my fellow kin to fight as well. Ei nodded, knowing she couldn't argue with Yae. Next, we must gain an alliance with Watatsumi Island's army. Shall push come to shove, we will need every bit of help we can get. I will entrust that task to you three, unless you have any objections. The three shook their heads, Ayaka having already stated prior that that was a task she had in mind, shall the Shogun approve. Very good. Lastly, the security of Narukami Island must be doubled to assure that, if there are threats already within our borders, we have a better chance of preventing what happened to Liyue Harbor. We must prevent another destruction of a nation. I will speak with my brother on that, Ayaka added. Given it's a direct order from the Shogun herself, he won't question it. Just in case, I will write a form with my request on it, Miss Kamisato. We can't afford to waste any time whatsoever. Understood. I will await your submission. Ei nodded and turned her gaze to Ganyu, Yelan, and Keqing. I will assign you three an escort to Watatsumi Island shortly. Be safe, and do your best to persuade their leader, Sangonomiya Kokomi, as you did me. After I have assigned Miss Kamisato my order to the Tri-Commissions and the Shogunate, I will depart with Yae to the center point of Inazuma to form a safety barrier over its entirety. Understood. Be careful out there, Your Highness. Ei nodded in assurance, concluding the meeting with one final statement. Thank you all for what you've done for Inazuma. This will not be forgotten. Shall victory come in our favor when doomsday arrives. The ride to Watatsumi Island had been a peaceful stroll accompanied by sights that would bewilder anybody who came into sight of them. The most notable had been another of Inazuma's islands far off in the distance, a giant plume of clouds and a radiant purple hue spotlighting the massive land. The main center point of the island looked like a giant crater that had been formed by the collision of something like a meteor or comet. But upon their guide explaining that it wasn't a crater, nor had been formed into its current state by an object beyond their world, the three had been left stunned. By the time they had met any eye shot of the shores of their destination, over an hour had passed since their departure from Tenchukaku. Upon seeing Watatsumi Island for the first time, the three were captivated by its appearance. To say it was beautiful was an understatement. The island gave a sense of welcome and peace, something that Ganyu, Keqing, and Yelan had been seeking desperately ever since the fall of Liyue Harbor's existence. Upon coming into contact with the island shores, They were immediately met with a soldier that was armed with a spear. This was no surprise to any of them, knowing that they were strangers to the occupants of Watatsumi Island, so they treated the approach with care. "Halt!" the guard demanded. "In the name of the Divine Priestess, I demand that you identify yourselves and state your reason for coming here." Yelan took the lead in the situation, being the best at negotiation. "Greetings, my name is Yelan." She started calmly. "These two are my comrades, Miss Ganyu and Keqing. We've come under order of the Raiden Shogun to speak with your leader, Sangonomiya Kokomi. We have no malicious intentions, nor wish to pose any threat to you or anyone who occupied this land." The guard didn't lower his weapon, again, not surprising Yelan the slightest. "A likely story, but unless you show me proof that you were sent by the Shogun under innocent intent, I will not even consider your request," the guard proposed. "Very well," Yelan answered, grabbing a rolled-up piece of paper from Keqing, who had been carrying a submitted letter of confirmation ever since they'd left Tenchukaku. She handed out the paper to the guard, to which he took, unrolled, and read. After a short 30 seconds, he rolled the letter back up and followed up with a second request. "Your letter checks out, but if you have no reason to cause harm or endangerment to the Divine Priestess, then I ask that you disarm yourselves of any weapons you may have on you," he requested. "Only after that will I allow you to even take one step onto Watatsumi Island." Yelan nodded in understanding, turning to Keqing and Ganyu. "Well, ladies, you heard the man. Hand your weapons over." The two nodded in agreement, and one by one gave Yelan their weapons. Ganyu was first, reaching out and giving her comrade the Amos bow she'd carried as her tool of defense ever since receiving it from the person of the same name in the Archon War. It was a gift she'd received as a thank you after Ganyu had done her best to protect them in a siege where they were greatly outnumbered. With her abilities as a half-Qilin and Amos's archery skills, they had managed to stand against the hundreds of enemies firing in their direction. Ganyu had taken several arrows to her body, as much as lacerations to her flesh and fractures to her bones, but despite the several wounds, she survived. Amos hadn't been so lucky, however, having lost too much blood from her wounds, despite Ganyu's efforts to protect her from the barrage of attacks aimed at her. It had been a painful day, and having to part with a very meaningful gift she'd now carried for centuries upon centuries stung her heart. However, it was only for a temporary short time, and right now, the world was at stake. Therefore, she allowed Yelan to take her weapon, following with her giving it to the guard. Keqing was next, unclipping her sword tucked away in its sheath from her left hip. Her weapon carried sentimental value as well, having had it custom made not long after settling down in Liyue Harbor. She had handpicked the metal to be used for the blade, and had requested the weapon to carry the might of a lion's roar. The blacksmith, Kunwu, had honored Keqing's one request and had crafted and named the blade Lion's Roar, the end result being a durable, lightweight sword that could withstand over 1,000 strikes to the surface of a diamond. Even to that day, the sword remained light, and the blade didn't have a single chip, dent, or scratch. Even its sharpness remained, having never been sharpened ever since the day of its forgery. Parting with it made her feel unbalanced, but there were bigger things at risk, so she swallowed her emotions and allowed Yelan to take Lion's Roar from her grasp. Yelan was last to part with her weapon, ripping her bow Aqua Simulacra and handing it over to the guard. Parting with her weapon was the equivalent of tearing her heart in two, the weapon having been a gift from one of her dearest friends she had tragically lost during a mission that had gone wrong. It had been customly forged, and carried special properties that allowed Yelan to infuse it with the energy her vision granted her while preparing a shot. It had gotten her through several scuffles, including the time she had spent wandering around prior to Ganyu finding her. She managed to defeat any threats that crossed her path with ease, and had even provided herself with meat from animals she'd shot and killed with aqua simulacra. Less to say, it had been her tool for survival and had gotten her by, so to give it away to a stranger was very hard. However, like Ganyu and Keqing, she knew the bigger factors at play, so she just ripped off the band-aid and gave the guard her only remnant of one of her past comrades. With their hearts torn and pride stained, the guard nodded his head and allowed them to the shores of the island. "Follow me, and I'll take you to the Divine Priestess," he commanded. All three of them nodded in agreement and followed the guard from the sandy shores deeper into the island. They followed a main dirt path that came to a wooden bridge, eventually leading them to a small village that was occupied by only very few people. From there, they came to the site of the island center, the view being a beautiful array of colors and waterfalls. Off in the distance, the sight of a single structure came, appearing as a stack of gargantuan clamshells that led to the main place atop the peaks of the inner island center. They crossed another two bridges, coming to the peak they all had spotted before, and after traversing up to the top, met the very building that appeared as a shrine. It was a gorgeous and massive structure, definitely befitting for one with the title of Divine Priestess. The display was so mesmerizing that they hadn't realized the practical guide had come to a stop just before the staircase that led to the main building of the entire mass, causing Yelan to accidentally bump into the guard. He paid it no mind though, and remained steady as if nothing had even happened, turning to address them further on the task at hand. "Please wait here," he directed. "I'll go and retrieve the Divine Priestess for you. I shouldn't be too long." "Do what you gotta do," Yelan answered. "We'll just admire the view until you get back." The guard nodded, then turned to the shrine and disappeared upon entering the main building. The three girls didn't really have much to say during their wait, too captivated by the several perspectives surrounding their current position. It was on par with what you'd expect to be the abode of a god. Dazzling spectacles and flourishing panoramas everywhere they looked and admired. It carried a sense of peace and harmony unlike any other, causing them all to just fall into a trance of numb bliss. Up until they were interrupted by the sound of the guard yet again, turning to see said person, accompanied by a lady that resembled a mermaid. She was an average height, skinny, and her blondish pink hair was tied up into a ponytail, extending down to past her waist. Her eyes were mystical, being a mix of blue and purple, and her attire seemed to mimic a mermaid's body. It fit the atmosphere of the entire scenery perfectly, along with the fact that it fit her title amazingly well. "These are the people that asked for your acquaintance, Miss Priestess," he explained with a gesture of his hand, waving it out towards the three. The majestic priestess merely nodded her head with a smile, clearly sensing no malice from any of them. "Greetings," she greeted, her voice soft yet authoritative. She walked out towards them, wanting to present herself with a proper welcome. "My name is Sangonomiya Kokomi. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the Sangonomiya Shrine." "The pleasure is ours, Miss Kokomi." Yelan followed. "My name is Yelan, and these two are Ganyu and Keqing. We are all former officials of Liwei's government." "Interesting," Kokomi answered rather simply. "You all have come so far, so please address why you've requested this meeting." "Of course," Yelan replied. "However, it's probably best if you just read this." Yelan handed out the letter that A had given her, to which Kokomi accepted with care, unfolding and looking over every single line of text with full focus. It didn't take her long to catch on, lowering the letter from her eyes and rolling it back up neatly. "Come with me," she commanded, her voice tone having changed to something more serious and stern. Nobody spoke, following her command and moving to wherever she planned to take them for likely safe talk out of the ears of potential threats. Kokomi led them into the shrine, into a secluded room that resembled a meeting place for people like generals. Just from its current state, Yelan, Keqing, and Ganyu could all tell it hadn't been used for years, which made it less likely to be suspected of any potential threats disguised in plain sight. "Please, take a seat," Kokomi offered. The three didn't argue and just took a seat in one of the many available ones. Once they were all properly seated, Kokomi seated herself across from them, her demeanor surprisingly calm. "First, I'm dreadfully sorry for all that has happened to you three. It must have been terrible to suddenly lose your home in the blink of an eye." "Thank you for your words, Miss Kokomi," Keqing stated. "It's been hard, but we found ways to rebound, hence why we're here." Kokomi nodded, sighing before speaking. "Watatsumi Island has had its bouts with the Raiden Shogun in the past, and while some may still carry hatred for her, this is a situation that I don't think we can let feelings get in the way of. Therefore, I'm willing to help in any way I can. But I need to know the full extent of this crisis to understand what I need to do." A breath of relief escaped all three of them, having not expected this to go so easy. However, it wasn't done yet, so Yelan moved to explaining everything they knew about the situation. "Well, it started with 3, but the truth is that we're up against up to hundreds or thousands of androids that look like any ordinary human being. These androids are capable of absorbing elemental energy created from visions, and can use it as a weapon in rebound. Miss Ganyu witnessed this herself, having saw the Tianquan, Liwei's ruler, be killed in a horrible way. Ms. Keqing was also injured terribly by another one of these things, having only managed to escape death by a hair's width. However, there's one fortunate thing in this entire endeavor. The army of androids that the Tsaritsa is producing isn't done yet, so we still have time before the worst-case scenario can occur." "I see. Anything else?" "Yes. These androids are being powered by the elemental energy of the Geo-Archon Rex Lapis, hence the Guardians of Liwei, the Adepti. Ancient beings with power potent enough to end the world. It's why these androids are capable of inhuman abilities. That's the reason why we informed your Archon first. She could be in danger." "All right. Thank you, Miss Yelan. The way I see it is that we are on a very thin time window to get the advantage, and unless we get the advantage, it's basically the end of the world." "Correct." Kokomi sighed, coming to full realization of just what she was about to jump into. "Okay. The first thing I see as an advantage is to find some way to counter these androids' capabilities. Weakening the enemy makes it much easier to destroy them, and with this solution, we wouldn't need to battle every single android at their max potential." The idea surprised all three of them. It was a solid counter to the issue. If they could slow down or weaken their enemies, it would make taking them out easier. However, one problem remained with that idea. What counters the elemental energy of the divine? "Do you have any idea on what could possibly do that, Miss Kokomi?" "Unfortunately not. But if there's one thing I've learned as a strategist, it's that sometimes solutions aren't as direct as they may seem to be. Sometimes the solution to something that seems impossible can be practical in nature." Yelan caught exactly what she was saying. the formula to counter a god's power didn't need to be something complicated, but something more simple and effective. Then Yelan remembered something. The day they caught Reshov. "I've got it," Yelan stated, turning to Ganyu and Keqing. "Girls, do you remember how we caught Reshov?" Keqing and Ganyu were confused, up until they connected the dots and answered.
"Lisa's spell!"
Keqing and Ganyu confirmed in unison. Yelan nodded, then turned back to Kokomi across from her. Forgive me for the sudden exclamation, but I have a solution that is guaranteed to work." "You do? Please, feel free to explain." "Thank you. Now, in our journey getting here, we had to catch the very android responsible for the Tianquan's death in a trap. This all occurred in Mondstadt, during which we subdued the machine by use of a very nasty spell that the city's librarian mage, Lisa, cast on the doorknobs of the entrance to the building we had lured him into. Upon touching the doorknob, he was infused with the spell's potency, and as a result, he fell unconscious. That's our counter to the power of those machines. A nasty dose of whatever Lisa cast that day." Kokomi's eyes brightened. One crucial factor had been solved, but the task remained of finding out what kind of hex Lisa had conjured to submit Reshov to the floor like a rock sinking in water. "That's great to hear. But do you have any idea what this Lisa cast to cause this?" "Not exactly, but we do know that it was an uncommon spell that takes lots of physical energy and strength to cast in a large amount. To get a straight answer, we'd need to ask Lisa ourselves." "We don't have that amount of time, and I'm sure you all are on the same page as me about that issue." Yelan nodded, fully aware that traveling to Mondstadt would take at least 3 days to do. They were on a time clock, and couldn't afford to waste any more time than they already had. The fate of Teyvat was at risk. Kokomi continued upon confirmation that they were all thinking on the same level. "Good. Therefore, we have to find a way to recreate that hex that subdued the first enemy you encountered, and from how you explained it, it seemed to be nothing more than a very powerful surge of electricity that managed the task. Therefore, I believe all we need is some kind of weapon that can inflict a very powerful electrocution to its target." Yelan nodded in agreement, having thought the same outcome, but there was much to consider in this solution. Kokomi had caught on fast. "So, what can inflict a shock with the same amount of strength as that spell? And more importantly, how much electricity did that spell exactly exhume?" Again, more obstacles than a solution. They were getting nowhere in this meeting, meaning that the time that Yelan, Keqing, and Ganyu had all feared had come. "The way I see it, there's only one way we can find these answers to properly get an advantage against the Tsaritsa. We can't blindly guess at the risk of it not working. Otherwise, we've already lost the battle before it even had a chance to start." "What are you suggesting?" Keqing chimed in, fearing she already knew the answer. "We need to split up. There's no way we can do this with all of us in one place. It'll just cost precious time that we don't have. So the only option is for one of us to go back to Mondstadt to get the answers we need." Ganyu and Keqing both didn't like the answer, but they also were aware that Yelan was correct on the matter. Splitting up was the best way for them to cover more ground and get more done than they would traveling together. It was terrifying for them to go separate ways, but it had to be done to have a chance of victory. Keqing sighed before answering. "You're right.
While it is a huge risk to split up, it's the best option in our current situation. Therefore, I'm in agreement that we should separate for now.
Ganyu nodded with no argument.
I can agree as well. It's a huge risk, but we can't just take blind guesses and risk failure when the time comes in battle. I've seen too many friends and allies die over assuming they had enough strength or power to beat an enemy. And I'd rather not see more blood of the dear people I love fall on the battlefield.
Yelan nodded again, turning her attention back to Kokomi. I assume you agree as well, Miss Kokomi?
Affirmative, Miss Yelan. Given this crisis involves all of Teyvat, I agree that the best course of action is to cover more ground to advance our plans.
Excellent. Then, considering I'm faster and the Fatui sources in Mondstadt won't suspect me as a threat, I'll take the trip back. You girls will stay in Inazuma and continue to make progress and protect the Raiden Shogun with all of your strength. Ganyu and Keqing didn't argue, knowing that Yelan was definitely the best of them to go back. She could travel fastest across land and evade any Fatui that may suspect her easily. There was no reason to debate or question it.
I have no objections to that.
Keqing agreed.
Me neither.
Ganyu added. Good. Now, back to other matters. Yelan finished, allowing Kokomi to speak on any further actions or plans.
Of course. Now, the bigger issue. Getting my people to agree to this whole thing. Ever since the Shogun separated Watatsumi Island from the others, all of the citizens of Watatsumi have had a grudge and heavy hatred for her. Getting them to agree to helping protect her and Narukami Island from these threats is the equivalent of getting ice to befriend fire. But once it's clear that it's either protecting her or their lives, they'll come to reason, right?
Keqing stated.
Surely they wouldn't choose death over life. The answer to that is a mixed bag. For some, yes, but for others, even hatred can root deep enough to die over it.
That wasn't the answer any of them had been expecting. It was a sad and dark one, but at the end of the day, the fact remained that it was their choice. It was silent for a long minute, until it was broken by Keqing's voice.
Then, I suppose all we can do is try. After all, in the end, their choice is theirs to decide.
Kokomi didn't even flinch, knowing full well that Keqing's statement was the inevitable conclusion, and exactly what was to come in short time.
Affirmative. Shaking a person's will isn't easy, but I'll do my best to persuade them. They won't think I'm lying, so at least that factor isn't a potential obstacle. However, their choice to fight or die will be theirs alone.
Kokomi sighed again, dreading the coming hours, but if she wanted to save her home and the entire world, she'd have to suffer potentially a few losses as a price to pay.
With that, this meeting is adjourned. Please give me some time to write a proper speech for my people to hear. Until then, it's probably best you all head back to Narukami Island to inform the Shogun of the new plans. I sincerely wish you all a safe trip back, and a safe journey to Mondstadt for Miss Yelan.
Thank you, Miss Kokomi. Yelan thanked, bowing as an additional gesture. I'll do my best to get my mission done as fast as possible. Kokomi bowed in return, concluding the meeting.
Watatsumi Island thanks you for all you've done. Please, be safe, and may the gods grant you safety in your endeavors.
Ganyu, Keqing and Yelan all bowed in return as they got up from their seats and walked back to the shrine, bracing themselves for whatever was to come next in their journey for retribution for Liyue Harbor. Upon meeting the outside of the shrine, a sudden noise that matched that of the crack of lightning made them all jump in surprise. It echoed for a long moment, followed by the accompaniment of a sight of a dome forming over the entirety of all of Inazuma's islands. That meant that Raiden A and Yae Miko had initiated the plan, and the battle to protect Inazuma from destruction had officially begun. Something all three of them knew as they moved forward, back to the shores of Watatsumi Island.